Hello there and welcome. In the previous episode we added a blood effect and some sounds to our zombie, and in this episode we want to deal with the player. At the moment the player is getting hurt and the HP is getting lower, but there is no way for the player to know it, there is no indication, and when the HP is getting to 0, nothing happens. So we're going to deal with all of this, and we're also going to add a hurt effect, and we're also going to add some sounds when the player is getting hurt. First of all, we want to create some kind of bloody screen effect when the player is getting hurt. So for this you can find a link in the description for a PNG that I found, but of course you can use whatever you want. I have it here inside this blood overlay. So all we want to do is simply display it on the screen each time the player is getting hurt. We're also going to create some kind of fade effect, so it will fade after several seconds. So we are going to open our player script, and inside the player script we're going to have a reference to this bloody screen. Then over here, when the player is getting hurt, we're going to start a coroutine that is going to display this bloody screen. Then we're going to check if the bloody screen is not displayed, we're going to display it, and if it's already displayed, we're not going to display it. And of course we want to have the delay for this animation. So now when the player is getting hurt, it will simply display this bloody screen, and after 4 seconds it will make it disappear. But this will not look very good, so we want to create some kind of fade out. So it will slowly fade out during these 4 seconds. For this we're going to add some code over here. You can find a link in the description for this chunk of code because it's a bit long. So all you need to do is go over here, select this part and delete it, and then just paste the code over here in the middle. So this entire chunk of code you can find in the paste bin in the description, and all we're doing over here is getting the image component from the bloody screen. Then we're setting the alpha of the initial color to be full, and we're setting the duration to be 3. Of course you can change the duration. Then we're simply checking if the duration is still not over. We're simply going to lerp from the full alpha to the empty alpha. And we're going to set the new alpha as the color, and then it's going to simply fade out this entire screen. And of course we don't need to set any kind of duration for the coroutine because we're doing this inside using this duration, and as long as the duration is bigger than the elapsed time, it will still run this while loop, so this entire coroutine will not be over. Now we simply select our player and we need to add this bloody screen over here. So we first need to add the actual UI. So I'm going to open the UI over here and we're going to have a new canvas. So we're simply going to create a UI image and it's going to create a new canvas. We're going to call it bloody screen. Then we're simply going to click over here, hold Alt and click on the stretch so it will stretch it to the entire screen, and then we're going to drag the art inside the source image. So over here I'm going to drag this bloody overlay into this slot. And lastly we're going to take this bloody screen and drag it into the player. And of course we also want to make it invisible in the beginning. And now if we run the game and we get closer to the zombie and we get hit, we see this overlay with the blood fading out. And at this point it stops, and if you're wondering why it stopped, it's because the player is already dead, so we're not running this line of code. So of course we need something to happen when the player is dead. Inside the player script, we're going to go to this part where the player is dead, and we're going to create a method named player dead. Then we're going to generate this method. And the first thing we want to do is to disable the mouse movement and the player movement. But instead of going into these scripts and creating some kind of boolean, the simplest way we can do it is to simply disable these scripts, because these scripts are sitting together with the player script. So we can simply reach them and disable them. So we're going to get component and disable. And we're going to do the same for the player movement. The next thing we want to do is create a dying animation. So this dying animation will simply make the player fall on the floor. Maybe in your case you just want the screen to get dark. Maybe you want to do something else. We are going to make the player fall on the floor and it will be a bit more realistic. So we can do this by creating an animation for this entire player body, but it's not going to be relative to the scene because this is in the root of the scene. So when it will happen, it will always come back to the position that we created the animation. So if you want this to work with this entire player body, you need to place it inside another object. So it needs to be a child of some kind of environment parent object, or maybe some kind of overall scene object, and then it will work. But because we don't want to create this, we're going to do the animation on the main camera, because it will give us the same effect. So we're going to select the main camera, we're going to click on the animation tab, and we're going to create a new animation. We're going to open our animation folder and name it Player Death. I already have this from my testing, so we're going to have a new one, Player Death, and we're going to replace the one that I already created. So over here, all we need to do is start recording, go to the last frame, which will be the 60th frame, and we're going to rotate the camera so it will look like the player is falling on the ground. So the Z value of our rotation will be 90. And for the Y of the position, we're going to set it to be -1, so it will be closer to the floor. So this is how it will look. And if we run this entire animation, then we can see that the player is simply falling on the floor. But it's just the camera falling. And of course, you can play around with this. You can make it like the player is falling backwards or differently, but this is how we're going to do it. So now we're going to end this animation. And we're going to keep selecting the main camera and go to our animator. And over here, we're going to keep the player death as the default animation. So of course, we don't want this to loop. So we're going to select the animation over here, player death, and we're going to disable the looping. And the way we're going to do it is by disabling the animator, and only when the player is dead, we're going to enable the animator. And then it's going to run this animation because this is the only animation that we have, and it's the default animation. So we're going to select the player, and we're going to select the main camera that has an animator component because we created an animation. So we're simply going to keep it disabled. Now we're going to open our player script once again, and over here we're simply going to enable the animator. So get component in children, and we're going to enable the animator, and it's going to run the death animation because it's the default animation. And again, after all of this is done, make sure that the animator is not selected. Sometimes it's getting selected by itself, I don't know why, but just make sure that it's not selected. So now let's run the game, and when we go and we actually get hit a few times, then we're falling on the floor and we are dead. Now we also want to create some kind of UI indication for the health of the player. So again, inside this canvas, we're going to create a UI, Text Mesh Pro. We're going to name it Player Health. We're going to anchor it to the top, and we're going to move it a bit. So something like, then we're going to change the font so it will look a bit better. And we can give some kind of placeholder, although we're going to change it inside the code. Back inside the player script, we're going to have a reference to this player health. So public text mesh pro. And if you did not import this, then simply import using TM Pro, and then you're going to be able to use the text mesh pro. So text mesh text mesh pro UGUI, and we're going to name it player health UI. And then we want to display the health at the start of the game and also each time it's getting updated. So inside the start method, we're going to set it to be the health of the player. And we also want to do the same thing each time we're getting hurt. So over here, we're going to do the same thing. Another thing we want to do is hide the player health when we're actually dead. So when we die, we're simply going to hide this entire game object. Now we're simply going to drag the player health into the player. So over here, we have this slot, we're going to drag it. And now when we run the game, we can see that we have 100 health. And when we're getting hit, it goes down by 25 because this is what we set for the zombie, and when we reach 0, we are dead. I also changed the duration of the bloody screen effect to be 2 because this way it's going to be updated faster and it's not going to take much more time until a new one appears. Next, we also want to add some kind of fade out screen when we are dead. So for this, we're going to create another image over here. We're going to name it fade out. We are going to actually name it blackout. We are going to stretch it. So we click over here, we hold Alt and we click. And then we're going to change the color to be black, but we're changing the alpha to be 0 because it should be transparent in the beginning. Then we're going to create a new script and we're going to name it Screen Blackout. Again, the code is a bit long, so I'm going to provide you a link in the description. You're simply going to copy the code, you're going to delete everything inside this default script, and you're going to paste the new code over here. There's nothing too complicated. We're basically doing the same thing we did with the bloody screen. So we have a reference to our image, we have a fade duration, and then we can also start the fade whenever we want. And this starts a coroutine that simply fades this entire image. I named it screen fader inside, so let's do the same thing. Otherwise, it's going to give us an error. So let's rename this to screen fader. Now we're going to take this script and drag it on our player so the player can use this. We need a reference to this image, so we're going to take the blackout image and drag it over here. And then inside the player's script, all we need to do is when we're actually dead over here, we're going to run this fade screen. So get component, screen fader, start fade, and it will start this fade. Another thing I want to do is add some kind of title for the game over or for the death. So over here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have a reference for this text, death, or maybe game over UI. And this should actually be a game object because we're not going to change the text itself. So it doesn't really matter if it's a game object or not. Then when we are dead over here, at the end of the player death method, we're going to start a new coroutine and we're going to show game over UI. And this will be a coroutine as well. And inside we're going to have some kind of delay. And after the delay is over, we're simply going to show this UI. Now we need to create this title here as well. So again, UI, Text Mesh Pro. We are going to change the font. We're going to increase it. We're going to position it in the middle. And we're going to stretch it as well. And we're going to give it some kind of title. You are dead. And then we're going to drag this into the player. So again, game over UI, and we will drag it over here. Now, of course, we need to disable this. We need to disable the blackout. Now we actually don't need to set the blackout to be disabled, otherwise it's not going to be visible. You can make it enabled or you can keep it disabled, but then inside the screen fade script, you simply need to set it to be active. So in the beginning, simply say fade image, set game object, set active. And then you can keep it disabled. And we also may want to change the duration. So instead of 7 seconds, we're going to set it to be about 3 seconds. And the very last thing that we need to do is, of course, inside the player, have a boolean that will say that the player is dead. So public bool is dead. So we're going to create this boolean, and then over here we're going to check if the player is already dead. And we can check this when we actually take this damage. So in order to find this, we can right click, find all references. And we know that we are triggering this method inside the onTriggerEnter of the zombie hand. So over here, we can simply check if it's a zombie hand. And over here, we can say if the player is not dead, right? Is dead is false, because we don't want to keep dying every time we are under 0 health. And of course, it's not going to help us if we're just checking this. We also need to set the boolean to be true. So over here, when we die for the first time, we are going to set it to be true. So player dead, and we're going to set is dead to be true. And now we can finally run the game and test everything. So when we get hurt, the health goes down and we're going to die very fast. And now the screen fades out and we are dead. At this point, we can create some kind of menu that will ask us to respawn or maybe just bring us to the main menu. We can, of course, stop the sound of the zombie. And all of this we're going to take care in a different episode when we are going to create a main menu. But this is basically how the player dies. Now you may get this error that I got that says that there is a null reference in line 18 over here inside the start method. So it basically doesn't recognize the player health UI text mesh pro, although we did have it set over here. So I try to figure out why this happens, and I really don't know what is the problem. And maybe if one of you knows why this happens, then you can tell me in the comments and I will pin this comment. But I didn't find a reason why it happens and I didn't want to spend time on it. Everything seems to be fine. We are setting it here. We are setting it in the inspector. It is working, right? We did see 100 health at the beginning of the game. So maybe this error is just some kind of bug. If you still are bothered with this error, you can simply go over here and disable this part. And then on the UI itself, you can simply add these 100 health points, and then you're going to see them at the beginning and they're only going to change when we actually get hurt. So this way you're not going to get any kind of error, although I still think it's a bug. Right? So now we're getting hurt. And the player is dead. Now, of course, the player dies very fast because on our zombie, we set the zombie damage to be 25 and the player only has 100 HP. So it means it takes 4 hits from the zombie for the player to die. So you can set this to be on a high difficulty, and maybe you want to have an easy difficulty that will give the player more health, or maybe give the zombie less damage, something like 10 damage for each hit. And remember that eventually we're going to have a lot of zombies, so we don't want to die immediately when a zombie hits us. The next thing we want to do in this episode is add some sounds when the player is getting hurt and when the player dies. So we will go back to the sound manager and we're going to add a new channel. So it's going to be the player channel. And we're also going to add 2 audio clips. One will be the player hurt. And the other one will be the player die. So as always, we need to create a new audio source. So for some reason, these are all expanded. Let's create a new audio source. Let's drag it into the slot. Let's disable play on awake and let's make it a bit less loud. And then we need to add both of these clips. I will provide you a zip file in the description, but again, you can use something that will fit your game. So I have these sounds over here, male pain and player death. You can rename this to be player pain as well. Then we're going to simply select the sound manager and drag the player pain into player hurt and player death into player die. So inside the player method, when we are getting hit, we're simply going to play this sound. So sound manager. And we're going to do the same for when the player is dead. So we can do it at the beginning of the player death method. We can do it over here. It doesn't really matter. Player die. So now when we're getting hit, we hear the pain sound of our player. And remember that I decreased the damage of the zombie, so now we only get hit with 10 HP. Of course, we can add more things like some kind of dramatic music. So to play this again, we're going to open the sound manager, have a new audio clip, or maybe game over music. We're going to drag the clip over here. And then when the player dies, we want to have some kind of delay and start the music. So we can place it over here. And in order to create some kind of delay, we're simply going to set the sound to be the clip of the channel. And then we're going to create a delay on this channel. And the delay will be about 2 seconds. So now when we die, by adding some sounds and by adding some effects, the game is really starting to feel much more alive, and you can see that it's very easy. And of course, if you want to do things that require a bit more attention to detail, you need to spend more time, but there's nothing too complicated about it. So that's all for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to deal with multiple zombies. So we're going to create some kind of zombie spawns, and we're going to be able to set the amount of zombies and the rate of the zombies that come out of these spawns. And it's going to actually give us some kind of challenge. So we're going to have waves of zombies and we need to survive these waves. And for this, we need to use different weapons. So that's all for this episode. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.